On April 22nd, 2025, about an hour before I locked up for the night, a gray Chevy Equinox rolled into my bay burning oil so fast, the owner thought she had a leak she couldn't find. She wasn't angry, she was exhausted. She told me she had been adding a quart of oil every 1,500 miles for the better part of a year, and 2 different shops had already been paid to find the leak. One replaced her valve cover gaskets, the other replaced her front crank seal. Almost $900 combined. The car still burned oil like it had somewhere to be. She sat in my waiting room holding a folder of receipts and said the same thing I hear at least once a month. Nobody can find where it's going. Today, I am revealing the 5th filter hiding inside your engine, the one almost no owner's manual explains clearly, the one most mechanics never mention unless they're specifically trained to look for it, and the one that was quietly turning this woman's engine into an oil-burning, sludge-building mess while 2 shops chased gaskets that were never the problem. I want you to understand something before we go further. You already know about 4 filters in your car: your oil filter, your engine air filter. If somebody's ever told you your cabin air filter, and if you're one of the rare few, maybe your fuel filter. Those 4 get talked about because they're easy to sell, easy to show a customer, and easy to swap in 15 minutes. But there is a 5th filter sitting in almost every modern engine, buried in a spot nobody thinks to check, and it is not filtering air you breathe or fuel you burn. It is filtering the exhaust gases coming straight out of your crankcase, the toxic soup of unburned fuel, moisture, and oil vapor that your engine produces every single second it runs. And when that filter clogs, which it eventually does on almost every car that keeps it, your engine does not throw a dramatic warning. It starts drowning from the inside slowly, quietly, for months before anyone notices. Here is the part almost nobody understands about how an engine actually works. Every time your pistons fire, a small amount of combustion gas slips past the piston rings into the crankcase. Mechanics call this blow-by, and it happens in every engine ever built, even a brand new one straight off the assembly line. That gas is under pressure, it is loaded with unburned fuel and moisture, and if it just sat in your crankcase, it would build pressure until it blew a seal or a gasket clean off the engine. So engineers built a system called positive crankcase ventilation, PCV for short, decades ago specifically to solve this. The PCV system pulls those gases out of the crankcase and routes them back into the intake, where they get burned off along with your normal air-fuel mixture instead of venting straight into the atmosphere. It is one of the cleanest, smartest emissions solutions ever designed into a car, and it has been standard equipment since the 1960s. But here is what almost nobody outside a dealership technician ever learns. Modern engines, especially the small turbocharged 4-cylinder engines that now sit under the hood of half the cars on the road, produce far more blow-by than the engines of 20 years ago. Higher cylinder pressures, tighter tolerances, direct injection, turbo boost pushing extra air and fuel through the combustion chamber. All of it means more gas, more oil vapor, and more moisture getting pulled out of that crankcase every single mile you drive. And routing raw oil vapor straight into a sensitive turbocharged intake tract is a problem serious enough that manufacturers had to add something the older PCV systems never needed. A filter, sitting in line in that crankcase ventilation path, whose entire job is to catch the oil mist and separate it from the gas before it reaches your intake and throttle body. That filter is the 5th filter. On many GM 4-cylinders, the Equinox, the Terrain, the Malibu, the Cruise, and on a long list of turbocharged Fords, it sits inside a small plastic housing tucked along the air intake tube or bolted near the valve cover, often no bigger than the palm of your hand. It looks almost identical to a tiny air filter element. And it is designed to be replaced. Not cleaned, not blown out with compressed air, replaced. the same way you replace an oil filter, because once it loads up with oil residue and carbon, it does not filter anymore. It clogs. And this is where things get dangerous, because a clogged crankcase filter does not just stop doing its job quietly in the background, it creates a bottleneck in a system that was never designed to have one. Remember, the entire point of the PCV system is to relieve pressure building inside your crankcase. When that filter clogs, the gas trying to escape has nowhere to go. Pressure starts building right back up inside the bottom end of your engine, exactly the problem this system was invented to prevent in the first place. And rising crankcase pressure does not stay contained. It looks for the weakest point in the entire engine to escape through, and the weakest points are always the seals and gaskets, the rear main seal, the front crank seal, the valve cover gaskets, the oil pan gasket. Every rubber and cork seal holding your engine's oil inside starts getting pushed from the inside by pressure that should never have been there. That is why so many owners chase phantom oil leaks for months, replacing gasket after gasket, seal after seal, when the real source of the pressure sits a few inches away in a $2 filter nobody thought to check. The woman with the Equinox was living exactly that nightmare. Her crankcase filter was so saturated with oil residue, it had turned into a black, gummy plug. Almost zero airflow was making it through. Her crankcase pressure was pushing oil past two separate seals that had already been replaced once, and it would have kept doing exactly that to a third seal and a fourth, no matter how many times a shop chased the symptom instead of the source. I pulled the housing, and I did not even need a tool to tell what was wrong. The filter element was black, swollen, and dripping. It looked less like a filter and more like something you'd scrape out of a drain trap. I want to be honest with you about why this filter almost never gets talked about. It is not expensive. It is not complicated. It usually costs between $15 and $35, and on most vehicles it takes less than 20 minutes to replace. There is no dramatic invoice attached to it, no big labor bill, no impressive-sounding repair to sell. A shop that finds a clogged crankcase filter and simply replaces it makes almost nothing off that visit. A shop that replaces a rear main seal instead of checking the filter first bills you $600, $700, sometimes $800 in labor alone, because getting to that seal usually means pulling the transmission. That incentive gap is exactly why this fifth filter stays invisible. Nobody is hiding it from you on purpose. It's just that fixing the actual cause doesn't pay the bills the way replacing the symptom does, so most technicians were never trained to think about the crankcase filter first. They were trained to chase the leak they can see. And the damage does not stop at leaking seals. Once that filter clogs and stops separating oil vapor from the crankcase gas, raw oil mist starts getting pulled straight into your intake tract, along with the gas that's supposed to be clean. That oil mist coats your throttle body. It coats your intake valves, especially devastating on direct injection engines where fuel is never sprayed directly onto the back of the valve to wash carbon away the way it was on older port-injected engines. Layer after layer of baked-on oil residue builds up on those valves over tens of thousands of miles, restricting airflow, disrupting the fuel-air mixture, and eventually causing exactly the kind of rough idle, hesitation, and check engine light you'd expect from a completely different problem. I have seen owners spend money on carbon cleaning services, walnut blasting the intake valves, without anyone ever mentioning that the oil mist causing the carbon buildup was pouring straight through a filter that had been ignored for 80,000 miles. Then there's the oil consumption itself, the symptom that actually brought that Equinox into my bay. When crankcase pressure rises and oil vapor can't properly separate and drain back down into the pan, more and more of that oil gets pulled into the intake and burned off in the combustion chamber right along with your fuel. Your dipstick reads lower every week. Your spark plugs foul faster. Your catalytic converter, which was never designed to process burnt engine oil, starts absorbing damage it was never built to survive, and catalytic converters are not a $15 fix. This is the part that should genuinely bother you. A crankcase filter that costs less than a fast food meal, left unchecked, can trigger a chain reaction that ends with a four-figure catalytic converter replacement, and almost nobody connects those two events because they happen months apart. So how do you actually find this filter, and how do you know if yours needs attention before it turns into someone else's $600 seal job? On most vehicles that use this system, the housing sits somewhere along the fresh air intake tract between the air filter box and the throttle body, or mounted directly to the valve cover near the PCV valve itself. It is usually a small round or oval plastic canister with a cover you can remove by hand or with a single screwdriver, no special tools required. Pop that cover and you're looking straight at the filter element. A healthy one looks like a clean, dry, off-white or lightly tan felt or paper disc. A failing one looks wet, dark brown to black, and often visibly saturated, sometimes with oil actually pooling in the bottom of the housing itself. If you see that, you already have your answer, and you don't need a scan tool or a diagnostic fee to confirm it. The fix itself is almost insultingly simple compared to the damage a clogged one causes. Remove the housing cover, pull the old filter, wipe out any oil residue sitting inside the housing itself, because that pooled oil will just recontaminate a new filter if you leave it, then drop in the new element and reseal the cover. On the vehicles I see most often, this whole job takes 15 to 25 minutes, most of that spent locating the housing the first time you do it. No fluids to drain, no gaskets that need to cure, no relearn procedure required afterward. You put the new filter in, you start the engine, and the pressure relief starts working the way it was designed to the moment that clean filter is back in place. What surprises most owners is what happens afterward. Idle roughness that had been blamed on old spark plugs smooths out because the intake tract stops receiving oil-contaminated air. Oil consumption that had been blamed on worn piston rings slows dramatically because crankcase pressure drops back to normal and oil stops getting forced past the rings and seals it should have stayed behind. And leaks that had already cost someone hundreds of dollars in gasket replacements simply stop reappearing because the pressure that was pushing oil through those seals in the first place is finally gone. I have watched more than one owner nearly throw in the towel on a car they thought was dying, convinced they were staring down a full engine rebuild, only to find out the actual cause was a $20 part that nobody had thought to check because nobody told them it existed. Prevention. Here is almost embarrassingly easy once you know what you're looking for. On most vehicles equipped with this filter, manufacturers recommend replacing it somewhere between 30 and 60,000 miles, though I tell my own customers to just glance at it every time they're in for an oil change, since it takes 30 seconds to check and tells you exactly where you stand. If your engine sees a lot of short trips, stop-and-go traffic, or extended idling, all of which increase moisture and unburned fuel getting pulled into the crankcase, that filter will load up faster than the manual's mileage interval assumes, and checking it early costs you nothing but a few minutes. The woman with the Equinox left my shop that day, having spent less on parts than she'd tipped a delivery driver the week before. Her oil consumption stopped within days. The two seals she'd already paid to replace held perfectly once the pressure behind them disappeared. She didn't need a new engine. She didn't need a third gasket replaced. She needed one filter that had never once been mentioned to her in 3 years of ownership and 2 separate repair visits. That is the story of almost every car that rolls into my shop chasing a mystery oil leak or an unexplained rough idle that nobody can pin down. The answer is rarely as dramatic as the estimate suggests. More often, it's a small, cheap, completely ignored component doing exactly what happens when nobody maintains it, quietly building pressure inside an engine that was never designed to hold it. Check your 5th filter. It might be the cheapest, most overlooked repair you ever make, and it might be the one that saves your engine before it ever gets the chance to fail. If this is the first time you've heard about this filter, you're not alone, and that's exactly why I make these videos. Subscribe if you want to keep learning what shops skip past, and drop a comment if you've ever chased a leak that turned out to be something completely different. Somebody reading this comment section is about to save themselves a very expensive mistake.